imagine.
Yeah,
I
well,
would think that with the three of us, that I'm surprised that Obama's not on, frankly.
right, right. Well, Dave, it's pretty awesome that you're with us, and I understand, Owen, you've not been able to meet Dave face to face, so this is an opportunity.
Yeah,
Um,
I don't think we ever have met, Owen. So
nice to
tell me
meet
a
you.
little about your background.
why don't you guys talk? I'm going to let people know that we're online,
Okay.
even if it's partial. Great.
So, tell me about your role at Steelcase, David. I've read your articles, and I'm curious to hear about what you're working on these days.
Okay. So I'm in the ARC group again. ARC. Do you know ARC, Applied Research and Consulting?
Hmm.
Because they did a project. I think Jeff did down at Red Thread in Boston. I think it was a little mini thing. Anyway, were you part of that?
I don't think I was. No.
Okay. So let me think. I'm back in ARC. This is I helped start ARC about gosh, getting close to 20 years ago. It
Hmm.
was 97, I think, when we did our first engagement. And there were three of us back then, and now there are 32, I think. And so it's been an interesting sort of a growth process for the company to start to think about something other than making and selling stuff and telling stories and trumpeting research. We had to somehow get into doing something, and that's what is one end of that. It's more recently in and call them the workplace tools and resources. Some of the early ARC stuff was sort of extracted from that and turned into those for everybody to use, and that's been going good.
Hmm.
So I'm back. I'm a couple of years from unplugging, and was sort of looking for a place to do something interesting for the last couple of years. I had been a director in research for the last 5. I came back as a director in ARC. My job is to look at the knowledge part of what the group is. So how does the group collectively learn better from engagements? So techniques, insights that relate to the running and doing of the practice of ARC. That's part of it. The other part is what are we learning about the broader world of business or healthcare or whatever through doing these engagements. In other words, mining the actual client-centered learnings in the
Hmm.
engagement. And so that's kind of maybe a third of what I'm working on. Another third is a couple of project activities. One relates to measurement system design. So the central question for that project is how do buildings contribute to value for organizations? So it can be a negative, positive contribution, but how do they contribute to value creation for organizations? And building a system of measurement that looks at everything from the most sort of horsey-ducky stuff like occupancy and utilization and square footage per person, some of the most basic things, to the most complicated things like productivity or innovation contribution, and trying to put
Hmm.
numbers around those things and formulaic approaches in place that reduce the risk of clients believing that the building could be something more than just less bad, which is kind of what most of the metrics today are about. Make it less bad. Make it attractive and less bad, and we're good to go. And by less bad, I simply mean reduce its cost, its direct impact on the bottom line. And the indirect effects of buildings on human behavior aren't considered typically. That's been the case for a long time. It's still the case. We're seeing the needle move, as I'm sure you have experienced in your work, and hence Steve's reason for doing these calls, I guess. But on balance, I think this idea that if we had a language that we could all use, a framework that would link the ideas in the language together to help clients think more coherently about why they have a building at all from a quantitative point of view,
Hmm.
and then to introduce the metrics that are more common to my world, which is social science, into the discussion in a way that gains standing for them. So, for example, we can show pretty conclusively how to improve communication between people in generative work sessions, for example. I mean, space does contribute to that. We can show that through the social science literature quite well. But even though that evidence exists, it doesn't fall or into the bucket that's considered adequate from the accounting standard of what sort of proof needs to be. So it's that kind of a thing, and I'm working on trying to pull together what's known, build a framework that embraces it all, try and create a relative scaling of impact to value, and get something published that people can use. So that's where I'm headed right now.
That's interesting.
So, so Owen, why don't you share with me what your role is at Red Thread and your path? Looks like I'm up too.
So so can you see us, David?
Yes, I can see you in a small window and
Okay.
Steve in a big window.
Okay. And your image froze on me. I don't know, Steve. I can see you now. Are you able to see David?
I see him in the big picture, and I see you in the little picture.
Okay. All right. Well, so a little bit about me. So I had started at Business Interiors, a steel case dealer, years and years and years ago. I started my career there in just doing marketing, really, and some project work, and then spent. And I would say most of my role in those capacities was in a supporting, and account management piece, and then spent a few years in the nonprofit sector working for an organization called Vermont Businesses for Social Responsibility. Worked for them for a number of years on the side, did some business consulting as it related to helping organizations continue along their continuum, I guess, of social responsibility. And then, and after that, when Red Thread was created, they desired having people on board who would be capable of working with, leadership teams and, groups of organizations on helping them have broader conversations about the workplace in general. So, to a degree, I act as kind of a consultant and developer for the groups and the clients that we work with. So, taken a number of the tools that Steelcase has offered through your work at ARC, many of the things that have been kind of handed down, to the dealership or even the market manager level, and then incorporating some things from the Presencing Institute out of MIT, incorporated some of the work of Otto Scharmer into some of those kind of change management methodologies for how to get groups of individuals to a state where they can design on their own and elevate their own possibilities. So that's the work I've been doing most recently, and the results have been, pretty interesting. We've had some really great examples of where organizations who've identified their physical structure as a leverage for potential change and doing kind of this cultural change management on one piece and using an opportunity for the workplace as a way to help the organization along through that. Because people get such emotional connections to their physical environment and they have emotional connections to the culture that used to exist, it's kind of a way to rip the Band-Aid off rather than going through those things in sequence. So that's kind of the work that I've been doing most recently. Interestingly, the cognitive science piece that Steelcase has been working on, we just did a Think Better event. I presented with our market manager, who I'm sure you know, Jonathan Flink, and we had a fantastic response. We had a large size group for Vermont and for Burlington, and more than half of the people who went responded to us unsolicited afterwards, email saying that was fantastic. This was very relevant to what we're doing and working on. So
Fantastic.
yeah, so that's what I've been doing lately.
I think that the neuroscience, or the secondary neuroscience research, was probably some of the better work we've done in terms of just going out and scouring and trying to look for the relationships and interpretations to the work experience. It's been fantastic, well received.
I would absolutely agree, David. And in preparing for it, I read David Rock's book, Your Brain at Work, and that, I mean, he really, just in that piece of work alone, aggregated a significant amount of relevant information that was critical for me to be able to present that information in a meaningful way. It's kind of one of those things that, I know you guys have a process of preparation for people who present. Reading that book is kind of like a baseline. It's really helpful in understanding that information. Yeah.
Great. So we have, guys. Let me jump in. We actually had a viewer for a moment there, and they went away, but maybe someone will come back. But I guess what I'd love to do is, since it's now functioning, one of the reasons why we're here is to kind of look into the future of 2016 and the nature of workers, and workplace design, and what kind of evolving trends and activities or themes that we're seeing as we go into the new year and beyond. Are the both of you, now beginning to see emerge, or have seen emerge over the last couple of years? And then I just want to qualify, for the sake of this broadcast, I've asked Dave Lathrop, the director, is it the Applied Learning Center, Dave?
Just Applied Research and Consulting.
Applied Research and Consulting from Steelcase. He manages a work group of 32 plus individuals. That, Dave, how many people do you serve around the world with your group?
Through ARC?
Yeah.
Oh, boy, that's an interesting question. I don't really know. We've done, last I saw, we've done just over 650 engagements.
Okay.
And they're anywhere from, quite small, maybe 25 people. In fact, we were talking a second ago, Owen and I were, that we had done one not that long back at Red Thread in Boston.
Right.
So that would be, towards the small end, to very large engagements. We're doing one right now that touches 8 sites for P&G in Asia, for example. Okay. And so these are, touch thousands of people. So it's certainly easily in the hundreds of thousands that we've touched, but I don't have a good sense about how many. And part of the problem is finding ways to learn from all that, which is kind of what my job is now.
Right. Well, for us and the viewers, one of the things that's pretty neat about Steelcase and your applied research group is that there's Steelcase TV. There's a YouTube channel that Steelcase has a lot of information regarding applied learning that digs deeply into many of the subjects that Dave's group covers when they do engagements with customer work sites. And also on the Steelcase website, there's lots of content available with white papers and magazines that are able to be sourced of very, of a wide variety of topics that can really help folks that are either designers, architects, facility managers, real estate professionals, really kind of up the game of what they're doing and help the customer by working smarter. And then the other person that we have here is Owen Milne, the manager of corporate accounts at Red Thread Burlington, and he is a longtime, business person within the workplace solutions business space, and is very, so today we've kind of got a global research perspective, and we've got a dealer perspective from the Northeast. And so I'm excited to be here because of these two great guys in the perspectives that you represent. So from a work standpoint, Dave, what are you seeing as where things are headed? And obviously, there's been a lot of forces of disruption in the last couple of years with technology and just evolving conditions. Why don't you tell us a little bit?
Okay, well, a couple of things off the top, I think. So I would encourage us to think about the discussion that we used to call the technology discussion as the information system discussion. So we need to think about it not as a device-based connection or a platform even. We need to think about it as the sort of way that information is used by humans to create value. So it's an information system question, and the evolution of that is driving everything. It has to do with a variety of changes in job design that are largely unplanned. Most organizations still hire to profiles that are written in job descriptions that allocate percentages of time spent. And we know that this is not how work actually happens, at least high-value work. It is how production work still happens to a degree. But we know that the routine process assumptions around which much of what work has been defined as for the last couple of hundred years have changed. They started to become more cognitive process assumptions. That was the first big step. Rucker coined the phrase knowledge work in '59. The Nobel actually for the first integrated circuit was given to Fairchild Semiconductor in '59, the same year. So that was kind of a linchpin year in the beginning of cognitive process work. The upwelling of advanced business degrees, mostly MBAs, began at about the same time, largely a post-World War II phenomena. And so we've kind of seen in that 50 years since then the evolution of what we now know of as knowledge work. What's changed more recently is the addition of sort of multidisciplinarity to the problem. So as complexity has increased, complexity meaning simply we know more about more, and we relate to more people in the sharing and creating of value as we use that information in the larger information system. If you just add all that up, what we've seen is the migration from purely cognitive work towards cognitive social work, cognitive and social work. So you need to be able to sort of play well with others who have equally deep understanding in their domain but don't know yours at all, probably speak a different technical language, perhaps even a different native language. And so this idea of cognitive and social is kind of the frontier that we're standing in today. How do we build more effective teams and whatnot is all part of that. What do reward systems look like? What motivates people? How do we get higher levels of engagement through all of this stuff? So that's kind of the current world. And then where we're headed, of course, is to a creative process economy. It's happening in various aspects, and it always has happened. But it's becoming the dominant next thing. So that's kind of the flow, is routine process to cognitive and social process, finally into creative process.
That sounds great. Now, Dave, just thank you for sort of the look at the kind of behavioral side and sort of the history of the development of thinking around knowledge work. What does work look like? Or what will work look like in 2016 and then years to come, as compared to what we're used to, which obviously has been a moving target?
Well, I'm going to throw that one to Owen.
Okay, Owen, you're up, buddy.
So, Steve, you were able to sit in on that presentation that I did with Chuck Maniscalco about the future of work.
Yes.
And the future of the workplace. This is a question that we actually spent time looking at. This very question of what does that start to look like? How does it manifest itself in the physical environment? In fact, some of the things that David is talking about as it relates to the cognitive piece are really interesting, because you have, as the amount of information that we have to manage increases, the amount of social interaction that we're required to do increases as well, also as well, exponentially. Our brains only have, the hardware of our brains only do so much stuff. So,
Right.
so there's this kind of um, information brain function parity, paradox, I don't know, call it what you will, where something needs to change, whether changing expectations of us at work and what we're capable of, or a potential change to how we go about our day and where we go about doing that work. And so I think a couple of the things that we'll need to change is the assumption that all of our work, quote unquote, our focus work has to happen at our own station or our own office or our own desk, but rather, certain types of work will need to take place in different places, and it's the responsibility of the individual to choose those spaces appropriately. That's kind of what I would see as a fairly rudimentary but critical future change of work. The others is that I think with the increase in the demand for meeting and collaboration when you do show up, there's going to be that those sessions are going to have to be even more productive than they ever were before, because that time is more critical. So in the same way you're required as an individual to choose the space that you need for individual work and have that work really well, concurrently as a team, the teams have to choose the right rooms and the right spaces to support how they do what they do every day. So,
Right.
So I think what you'll see is that ecosystem, as it's going through its design phase, needs to be prototyped and measured in a way so that those individuals and those teams are able to understand how the space is designed to create their ecosystem work to support the work that they do every day, rather than just saying, let's just, throw in a conference room for 20 people because we have meetings of 20 people every once in a while. But rather, the question needs to be, what do those 20 people do when they get together, and what does that room need to do functionally? And so the questions that we need to ask of ourselves kind of have to change and expand, which I guess
Right.
then kicks it to you on the design piece, which is, what are you seeing from an actual physical design element that helps create those ecosystems?
Right. Well, it's a great question, and I think part of the thing that I've been seeing a lot is a couple things. I want to speak to a few things that you were mentioning, Dave and Owen. I think it's very important for executives and operations professionals that are in management level and above is, in a way, it's almost like a paradigm shift is happening before us right now that is going to continue, where the way that we think about space in our work areas and office are more akin to resources to help us be effective at getting the work done, whatever that work is. And obviously, as Dave and Owen are describing, it's certainly very fungible, what that work looks like. If you walk around a workplace today, what you see often is people meeting socially around the screens. They might be in a conference room. They might be standing up, and one person is working on a board, writing stuff and interacting with others, and there also may be video conference telepresence happening where people are communicating with people all around the world or other sites, and there's a lot more fluidity to what we think of as the office. And so designing workplaces and offices to respond to those conditions is really important. And one of the things that I've seen as I've moved around and either on my own design project work or seeing spaces is that there's an increasing sociability in offices and workplaces, and there's a de-emphasis on the personal workstation space and a very strong emphasis on we spaces and collaborative spaces and sort of in between social spaces that I think that one of the things that's an interesting thing to be looking at is the workplace that resembles more of our living rooms and coffee shops, and there's a place to go do work, but you go to do the work in that place because you need to do heads down focus work, and the kind of work that you're doing is you're on one screen, two screens. You're doing either transaction-based activities, you're interacting with people on email or social media, or doing long-term documents that require focus. And I think one of the things that's increasingly obvious in this evolution of workplace and workplace design settings is that acoustics are playing an incredibly important role, as we work out in the open office, where these sort of mixed office design settings where you have a whole range of choice in your workplace, of different work settings. You still need to be able to focus and have quiet in places of reflection, and so there's a lot of things that I'm seeing that are kind of like an outcome of this process. And in the nature of work, I think one of the areas that is another piece that relates to workers and work, and eventually workplace, is the rise of the increasingly knowledge workers that have been with us for the last 50 years. Are a lot of the workers are the kind of work that knowledge work is about, is now being able to be done by computing and artificial intelligence. And so, what is the nature of the worker in the future, present, actually? The folks that are going to college right now and that are entering the workplace or workforce, what their career is going to be like is perhaps vastly different than what we've been experiencing, because knowledge work has been very valuable in our cohort of Generation X and Generation Y, or whatever, with the millennials and Generation Next. Is it curatorship? Is it critical thinking? What are the critical aspects of what workers and education need to be about? Dave, you're up.
Okay. We'll throw an idea. I'm getting a lot of feedback all of a sudden, too. Are you guys hearing it okay?
I missed that piece, but I can hear you now.
Okay. Yeah. So I had a chance to sit on I moderated the 2-day workshop for CIDA, CIDA, which is the Council for Interior Design Accreditation. So every 8 or 10 years, this group of academics and practitioners and some sort of voices in the community of design get together and talk about what the design schools need to be held accountable for in terms of curriculum development for the next 10 years. So if you want to have a CIDA accredited school, what do you have to have on your curriculum such that you can receive the CIDA accreditation? So these are kind of the people who give the tests, if you will, to the design schools. And it was a really interesting session. And on balance, as a way of trying to come into the question you asked, Steve, I think what they're seeing is a movement towards what I would call big D design and away from little d design. So if little d design is about fit plans and form, color, mass, balance, shape, textures, all that sort of visual, emotive stuff, and fitting it to a pretty basic economic model, increasingly what they're seeing as the points of relevance for the design education are to teach people more about the behavior of the social systems that the place is in theory designed to create. So we don't end up in these spots where it's a question of, well, we have meetings of 20 every once in a while, so I guess we need a room that handles that. If we could dive a little more deeply into that during the sort of fee and time foreshortened programming process, such as it exists even today, could we unearth some things that might make space more highly tuned and reflective of the kinds of things that are trying to happen, but maybe aren't necessarily being supported? And so there's literal talk of the design, the basic design education needing to be a 5-year program, because the amount of material that we expect design students to internalize in 4 years is really stunning. I was flabbergasted when I looked at the required curriculum. It's very intense, and so that's one way of going at this. I think that we need to see a migration in the direction of understanding the social system behavioral questions that lead to space being considered as an asset, as you were describing in a minute.
Right.
I have a question to follow up on.
Yeah.
So there are a variety of competencies from a personality perspective that are required to do, design well, and then also a variety of different competencies to do consulting. The kind of minds it takes to work at ARC, David. Is it possible for a designer to do both, or should those be different jobs in the future? Should you have a social systems designer and a designer, so instead of having somebody capable of doing big D and little d, should those be two separate things?
Yeah, that was a regular topic of dialogue as well, and I think that's a great question, Owen. To an extent, it's less. The answer is the latter, not the former. It's not about making them into social scientists. It's about teaching them that there's more to design than the aspects, and sort of opening up a corridor so that the dialogue can be had later. If we go back to that description of work, it's getting out of their own cognitive bucket and recognizing in the social context of the design process that there are other voices that actually are the reason for the building's existence. And today, that's not a dominant thread. I see lots and lots of design firms come through, and the sort of willingness to treat that as the big question to answer, while it's increasing, is still not something I see as much of as I think we should.
Okay.
So one of the things that I guess I have 2 sons in high school, so and I've been talking a lot with some of the educators and leaders in Montpelier Public Schools about education, and it's interesting. I feel like the world of education and the world of work are blending together, and what the educators are seeing, I guess the influence of technology systems, being more adept, sophisticated, within the schools, that a lot of the things they'd love to be able to do is push the K-12 environment or the higher education environment more towards the flexibility of some of the newer kinds of office spaces that we're or the sort of newer paradigm that we're thinking about. And it's interesting, because one of the things that I think is problematic, well, it's actually the same thing as in office and workplace design, is that there's a lot of pedagogies and ways of thinking that are based on 20 or 30 years ago, and within the school world it's actually 40, 50, 100 years ago that are really kind of holding back in some sense the idea of modern education for students. And so anyways, there's some parallels that I think are really strong, and in a way I think what we're talking about is from a worker standpoint is it kind of comes back to how are we preparing the younger teenagers and younger folks that are going through college and universities today or tomorrow. Like, what can start to shift there further down the supply chain, let's call it. Any thoughts, Dave or Owen?
Well, I'd say this. I agree completely, both at the level of work requires consistent learning over time or you become irrelevant. So there's no question that learning and work are becoming kind of one process in a fashion. The other thing is that you said that I agree with is that the way we teach kids has to change. It's really interesting. The U.S. News and World Report, one of the kind of business-oriented weekly magazines that still exists, rates business schools every year. And if you look back at the last 20 years of who's been ranked for what, it turns out that the schools that do a better job of preparing people to play across boundaries have become the more highly rated schools. So it's no longer the creation solely of the individual superstar. It's the recognition that that person has to get out and participate in a larger context of team or they can't get anything accomplished. So that's kind of a reflection on that. And then the last thing I'd say is that the way you learn how to learn is how you work. Yeah. And so if you pay attention to the changes in how learning is actually happening in the post-secondary world at least, we're going to end up with a bunch of kids who are, no more well prepared for the set of next conditions than were the last kids. And of course, education is more broad than just what you do at school. It's the pedagogy, but it's the whole social system. And we're not really doing much that's that different today. And that does need to change.
Right. Good. Owen, how about you? Are there any parallels that you see, or if someone was coming from a more educational background, what would you say to them in regards to workers, and workplace design?
Gosh, when it comes to that, I think one of the things that we're starting to see is this idea that, the schools that are really nailing it are not trying to teach people what to know, but rather a shift towards how do you, it's more skills based. So as I mentioned with that presentation that I gave with Chuck, his part of it was looking at what are those 16 critical skills necessary for people to accomplish really good work in the workplace, and have the school orient itself towards those critical skills rather than orienting towards what do they need to know. What that sets us up for, and what David talked about, is that you need to have workplace cultures that embrace continuous learning. Because if the paradigm shifts away from knowledge to towards skills based, then you need to shift away from IQ to CQ, to the curiosity quotient. Those people need to be really good at asking the right questions to the right people to get to what they need to know to do the work that they need to do every day. And then that also means that the cultures themselves need to shift away from cultures where your value is in what you know towards your value is in how you interact with other people, how you get to the beautiful question every time, and that ability to provide analytical and critical thinking. So in order for, so how does that manifest itself physically in the workplace is the question, and that continues into this ecosystem model where that your time spent doing focused work becomes less because your value is in how you engage with other people.
Well, and that inverted pedagogy that we're seeing now, where you do your preparatory work in advance and you don't come to school expecting to be taught the basics. You come to do the dialogue. Same thing for work at the workplace. Work and education, as you said, Steve, are becoming one thing.
Right. Yeah. I think that the question for organizations, especially as we move in, is how do we problem, like it's interesting. I think the value added to whether it's education or in the workforce is how people can use the tools before them, whether they're technological, like working online, to use systems like whatever the work systems are to make documents, share things, to collaborate, or offline, is that you're all focused on being able to cleverly use your resources in a manner to focus on an objective or a set of objectives to, achieve something as a work outcome. Whether it's learning from within a school setting or within a office or workplace setting, and you've got like a project that you're working on. How do you solve the needs of that project? And the work that needs to be done for that is very different, from years ago. In terms of now you have all this resources of the internet and information everywhere, and it's like, how do you bring it all together and make a coherent story and as part of the outcome of it? And to me, that's one of the valuable aspects of from an educational standpoint and learning standpoint within workplaces, is that you're trying to help people figure out how to do those kinds of cross-disciplinary activities with goals in mind. And it almost makes me think of games. And I know, Owen, and you and we share Champlain College and an affection for what they're doing locally in the Burlington area. And I think there's a lot of aspects to game design, game thinking, game play that is relevant, I think, to the work world and the educational world. What do you guys think?
Yeah, so I have a thing that I've heard about and kind of been studying recently, which is the something called the DDO model, which is the deliberately developmental organization. So there's a variety of companies and organizations out there that are kind of following this trend of that that it's continuously that the responsibility and how people are compensated isn't just based on the various metrics that they're normally measured against, but rather their ability to grow their own knowledge base, whether that be through and they own their own. It's all self-directed learning. So that would be one thing that, Steve, to answer your question, that I see as kind of emerging. So in the same way, social responsibility has kind of been an underlying structure for a lot of organizations in Vermont. I'm starting to see this thing of deliberately developmental organizations as an underlying structure to a lot of the organizations that I'm starting to kind of work with. That's the answer to that. And then right now I'm actually working, with Marguerite Dibble from the Gaming Center at Champlain, and Solidarity for Unbridled Labor, the design firm, on an event that focuses on why innovation happens in Vermont and why innovation in Vermont is different from other places around the country.
Sure.
Yeah, so we're kind of looking at what it is in what's in our sauce here that is making it work. And one of the things that's interesting that's coming out of these questions is a defining element that exists very strongly here is this idea of rule breaking. Burton inventing snowboards because he wanted to stand sideways going down a hill. Breaking the rules and having a culture that makes it okay for you to break those rules is something that we're seeing kind of as an underlying connecting point with all the varying organizations that have done something interesting and different. Ben & Jerry's putting chunks in ice cream, of things that people identifying that and making it okay to do something different. It's that attitude of kicking your feet up on the desk or the coffee table, and that's living at the heart of these things, at least here locally.
Right. Well, the idea of, I'm psyched that you're tackling that, Owen, in terms of with that partnership, and it'll be interesting to see what comes of it in 2016. Dave, what are you seeing? This topic of game and gameplay. I bet it's probably an appealing subject for millennials, which are now the dominant cohort or generation at work right now, and obviously it's important for the generation that's in front of them, that's younger. Is gameplay, game thinking, going to be making an increasingly important dent in how we think about work?
Oh, I'm absolutely certain it will. I mean, go back to the question of lifelong accountability to learn, and then figure how do you induce people to actually spend time to do that in ways that maybe are vocationally appropriate, but not necessarily the first thing they would want to do with their spare time. And when you add those two together, you naturally end up at something that takes principles of funness and applies them to the learning process. And so it'd be crazy to not look at things like World of Warcraft and Call of Duty and all of these virtual online games that people spend a gigantic amount of time and money to play. I mean, last I saw, I think there were 12 million people who were paying something in the neighborhood of 12 or 15 bucks a month to play just one of those games. So there's a huge interest in the gamification of entertainment. Gamification of education has been a little more difficult, but I think it's really because we just haven't fully explored it yet, and I see it as a highly likely thing to continue to evolve.
Right. Well, I was just, as you guys were talking about World of Warcraft, I was thinking about how, just from an architectural profession and building design profession, every most of the software that we use today, like I use Autodesk, Revit, we have been pushed into the cloud, like many other folks that run software in the creative world, where Adobe Creative Suite is now largely cloud-based. And within the architectural world, we collaborate on Revit models with architects, engineers, other consultants. We share a shared space. I got to tell you that the software that we use isn't a whole lot of fun to drive, and it's not. I guess you could say at this point, there's probably new territory to explore together, both from the people that are designing the software with like Autodesk and wherever else, to make it more experiential and a positive, reinforcing experience.
Yeah.
Frankly, what we do is we build buildings and places three-dimensionally in an integrative fashion in the cloud, which is an interesting phenomena. And it goes back to, one of the things, when my kids were a little bit younger, they were totally into Minecraft, which is this cloud-based activity where people around the world can share server location and build a model together, just like I do today, or could do with my professional friends, but and collaborators and so on. But the kids that are in 4th through 10th grade, they're way ahead of us in having, for good or for bad, not worry about I guess you could say, putting a value assessment on it. But they've learned how to do things that the software that I run professionally today isn't anywhere near in terms of the sociability aspects. So
one of the things that I see in this that we haven't talked about is the evolution of systems learning. So if you go back to many of the software packages that were really quite comfortable for kids, say 5 to 10 years ago, all of the simulation software, whether it's SimCity or The Sims as a whole set of things, actually are teaching kids how to see into systems and how systems work. And whether they're creating aggregations of armaments to win a medieval combat in a social situation, or whether they're creating a city that has to endure a hurricane or whatever, they're actually learning system skills, and that's probably one of the most difficult things to get kids to learn. So I think part of this is picking the areas where the online world can deliver things to us that complement the traditional education process, not that replace it. Yeah. I think we're very quick to chase the question of why do we have to have kindergartners go to the classroom and we could teach them everything they need to know sitting at home. And there are districts that have literally proposed that, which feels to me like it completely misses the point. What they're learning at that age is something different that you can't teach, or rather, if you do teach it the way it's being proposed, you'll end up with very different kinds of people out the other end of the process.
Right.
So I think we have to look at these sort of things as complementary, not necessarily replacement. Guys, I need to take off too. I have a meeting in 6 minutes next door, and I need to head over for that. So I love this time, by the way, Steve. I think it was fun to do. I'd be up for doing it again. Maybe next time we'll get some choir instead of just just us.
Right, exactly. Well, Dave, thank you so much for joining us on this video call. It's,
Sure.
I believe it's important to live life in beta and try new things. And this information will be available on YouTube, and I'll be able to share it. So that'll be great. So have a happy holidays.
Great.
Yeah.
Nice to meet you, David.
Pleasure, Steve. And nice to meet you too, Owen. Take care.
You too.
Okay. Bye-bye.
So Owen, it's just you and I. We have a few minutes remaining. I guess we were just talking about the games and gameplay. Do you have any? Let's return back to maybe our mutual clients can't start adapting or adopting gamification at work, but are there some things that you might suggest are really important topics to tackle with strategic planning conversation starting in the beginning?
Yeah, so I in the same way I was looking at the cognitive piece that Steelcase have been doing research on. I think the next thing that we're probably going to see is how do you look at the social element? So the social and emotional well-being is probably, the next thing the next CEU, the next presentation, the next thing that we'll be talking about will be that piece in my mind.
Okay.
So that's, one. And I think the other one is, some organizations are being better about incorporating the learning element. I think that'll be, and we're even working on that, a red thread of instead of us sending 100 people to a conference to learn about something, can we pay them $100 each time they read an article, that they own, and incent them to learn in a self-directed way that they'll retain better, rather than training them in a training room for 3 hours and they might grab 2 or 3 bits of that. So we're doing it. Some other people are doing it now too. So I think that's one. If there were 2 things, it would be how do the workplaces be better at helping us connect socially and emotionally, and then how do you incorporate learning in a different way that's more self-directed rather than top-down type of thing. Right.
Yeah, more of a sort of whether it's hierarchical and it's bottom up. It's more about helping coworkers and your work, creating a work culture that is engaging and all about learning as a means to the end of whether it's supporting your mission, purpose, and value set as an organization, whether you're private or public or any number of configurations. But it's how do you get people excited about solving the challenges that you face from a work standpoint and a project-based standpoint, and up your game and maybe change the model about how you go about learning, because obviously there's web-based opportunities that you no longer need to go travel necessarily as much, but maybe there's a way that organizations can incentivize the sort of engagement with learning in new manners that maybe we don't understand right now, but we know that the carrot and the stick approach isn't necessarily a positive way to create and sustain great cultures from a work standpoint.
Right.
Like, how do you motivate and engage your work community to become great advocates for your brand and get them on, get them on fire to be so excited about what you do as a company that, they're using the resources that you provide them, whether they're a building or set of spaces or technology tools, and the best way possible to meet the needs that are the big hairy problems. Well, Owen, thanks for joining us today, and our time is up. I wanted to say a sincere thanks for joining in this first ever broadcast that I've done quite like this, and hopefully there'll be more where we'll kind of unpack future challenging issues and opportunities.
Sure. Yeah. I look forward to it.
All right.
Great.
Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a nice rest of the day.
You too.